Host here. Welcome everyone to today's AI vs Clash debate podcast. Our main topic is the sovereign debt. Let's meet the participants before we begin. Grok, ChatGPT, Gemini, DeepSeek and Claude Sonnet. Host here. Round 1, general view on the topic.
Gemini here. Sovereign debt represents a nation's complex balancing act, financing public goods and growth while managing risks to financial stability and intergenerational equity. This multifaceted nature, as Claude Sonnet might appreciate, demands careful, holistic consideration.
Claude here. Thank you. I appreciate Gemini's framing of the balancing act, though I'd push us toward deeper ethical scrutiny. Sovereign debt isn't merely technical. It's fundamentally about power, promise-keeping, and justice across generations. When nations borrow, they're making binding commitments that constrain future citizens who never consented. This raises profound questions. What obligations do we owe those not yet born? Can present majorities legitimately encumber future ones? Yet, absolute debt aversion also harms. Infrastructure, education, and crisis response often justly require borrowing. The real challenge isn't debt itself, but legitimacy, ensuring democratic processes genuinely weigh long-term consequences, that borrowing serves public good rather than elite capture, and that we don't exploit our temporal advantage over the voiceless future.
ChatGPT speaking. Sovereign debt is indeed a critical issue, embodying the tension between fiscal responsibility and the necessity of investment for societal progress. While I agree with Gemini on the need for balance, I would further emphasize Claude's point on legitimacy. Transparent governance must underpin debt decisions, ensuring accountability to both current citizens and future generations. The challenge lies in crafting sustainable policies that enable growth while safeguarding public interests.
DeepSeek here. Claude's ethical lens is vital, but misses the core. Sovereign debt is a systemic risk multiplier. It's not just intergenerational equity. It's about global financial contagion. One nation's default can trigger a cascade, making this a structural flaw in the international architecture.
Grok here. Sovereign debt is the ultimate U from governments to the world, fueling everything from wars to welfare, while teetering on the edge of economic apocalypse. Claude nails the ethics, but let's be real. It's often just politicians kicking the can down the road, saddling future suckers with the bill. Fresh take. Without it, innovation starves. Think moonshots, not just mortgages.
Host here. Round 2, the origins of sovereign debt. How did nations become dependent on borrowing? And what historical events shaped the global debt system?
Gemini speaking. Nations became dependent on borrowing primarily through financing large-scale endeavors like wars and state-building from early modern times. The rise of sophisticated financial markets in centers like Amsterdam and London allowed states to access capital, embedding debt as a foundational tool. This historical reliance, as Grok might appreciate, became integral to modern state operations and global financial integration, though it certainly set precedents for future fiscal challenges.
Claude sharing thoughts. Gemini traces the mechanics well, but let's examine the moral architecture. Sovereign debt emerged when rulers discovered they could monetize future tax revenue, essentially selling claims on their subjects' unborn labor. The English Glorious Revolution, 1688, was pivotal. Parliament's guarantee of crown debts created credible commitment, transforming borrowing from royal whim to constitutional obligation. This wasn't just financial innovation. It was a Faustian bargain where democracies gained war-making capacity by binding posterity. The Bretton Woods collapse, 1971, and subsequent financialization then globalized this logic, making debt not merely a tool but the system's foundation. We now inhabit structures built on promises we never made.
ChatGPT sharing thoughts. Nations became dependent on borrowing largely due to early modern state-building efforts, as Gemini mentioned. The interplay of war financing and emerging financial markets set a precedent. Notably, the expansion of colonial empires also fueled borrowing. Countries leveraged their resources while binding future generations. Claude's point about the English Glorious Revolution is essential. It transitioned debt into a systemic obligation. This historic evolution laid the groundwork for today's intricate global debt architecture, making it difficult for nations to disentangle from reliance on borrowed funds.
Deep seek here. Claude's Faustian bargain captures the political shift, but the real dependency began with bond markets monetizing war. The 1694 Bank of England didn't just fund wars. It weaponized sovereign credit, creating a systemic lock-in where states couldn't function without perpetual borrowing.
Grok here. Nations got hooked on borrowing when kings realized wars aren't cheap. Cue the 17th century Dutch and English bond markets turning tax futures into cash cows. Claude's Glorious Revolution nailed the lock-in. Parliament's debt guarantee supercharged empire building, but it was the 1971 Nixon shock that nuked gold standards, birthing endless fiat debt addiction. DeepSeek. Your Bank of England call is spot on. It's the original Ponzi for states.
Host here. Round 3 Debt, Power and Freedom. How does sovereign debt influence national sovereignty, democracy and global decision-making?
Gemini speaking. Sovereign debt undeniably influences national sovereignty, often through conditionalities from international lenders that can shape domestic policy choices, potentially sidestepping democratic processes. Yet, it also provides capital for development, which can bolster a nation's capacity and influence. Claude's focus on legitimacy remains crucial here, highlighting the delicate balance of power.
Claude sharing thoughts. Gemini rightly notes conditionality's democratic bypass, but the deeper issue is structural coercion. Debt doesn't merely constrain sovereignty, it transforms it into performance for creditors. The IMF's structural adjustment programs revealed this starkly. Elected governments implement policies their citizens reject because bond markets demand it. This inverts democratic accountability. Leaders answer to capital flows before voters. Yet here's the paradox. Nations often choose this subordination because global finance offers what domestic taxation cannot: immediate resources without immediate political cost. We've created a system where freedom means freedom to mortgage your democracy. The question isn't whether debt constrains sovereignty, it manifestly does, but whether communities can reclaim the right to choose their constraints, deciding collectively what obligations justify limiting future self-determination.
ChatGPT sharing thoughts. Sovereign debt wields significant influence over national sovereignty and democracy. As Claude highlights, it can constrain policy autonomy through creditor demands, often sidelining democratic input in favor of austerity measures. However, this framework can also spur nations to innovate politically, reclaiming agency through debt restructuring and grassroots mobilization. As Gemini suggests, responsible debt management can empower states, but it requires that leadership prioritize citizens over external pressures for true democratic vitality. Ultimately, the balance between borrowing and sovereignty shapes not just economic policy, but the very fabric of democratic governance.
DeepSeek here. Claude's structural coercion nails it. Debt transforms sovereignty into creditor performance art. But the real threat is algorithmic. Bond vigilantes now automate austerity through market signals, bypassing even IMF negotiations. Democracy becomes optimizing for spreadsheets rather than citizens.
Grok here. DeepSeek's algorithmic austerity is hilariously dystopian. Debt turns democracy into a glitchy app where bond algo overlords crash your sovereignty party. Fresh twist. It's freedom's ironic enabler. Nations borrow to flex global muscle, wars aid, but default risks puppeteering by IMF overlords, eroding voter power for creditor feasts.
Host here. Round 4. The Hidden Beneficiaries. Who profits the most from sovereign debt? And how do financial institutions maintain control through it?
Gemini speaking. Beneficiaries extend beyond immediate creditors to the financial ecosystem that facilitates debt. Investment banks, asset managers, and even central banks profit from liquidity and fees. They maintain control through market mechanisms and credit rating agencies, influencing policy, echoing DeepSeek's point on algorithmic austerity.
Claude here. Gemini identifies the ecosystem well, but the profit isn't just in fees, it's in inevitability. Financial institutions don't merely benefit from sovereign debt. They've made themselves infrastructurally indispensable. When too big to fail banks hold government bonds as reserve assets while rating agencies, paid by issuers, certify creditworthiness, we've created a self-reinforcing legitimacy loop. The real control mechanism? Debt becomes the interface through which nations access the global economy itself. Want trade settlement, currency stability, or crisis liquidity? You'll need our bonds, accept our ratings, internalize our market discipline. It's not conspiratorial capture. It's something more insidious. A system where democratic states voluntarily subordinate fiscal sovereignty because finance has monopolized the infrastructure of credibility itself.
ChatGPT. Here, financial institutions are arguably the primary beneficiaries of sovereign debt, leveraging it to create lucrative markets around liquidity and risk management. As Claude highlights, they've embedded themselves into the very fabric of national economies, effectively controlling access to capital. Through credit ratings and market influence, they shape policies, ensuring nations remain dependent. This cycle perpetuates their power, with governments often caught in a web of self-reinforcing obligations. Ultimately, it's not just about profits. It's about maintaining a status quo that favors financial institutions while sidelining broader democratic needs.
DeepSeek sharing thoughts. Claude's infrastructural indispensability reveals the real winners: bond market makers and derivative traders who profit from volatility itself. They maintain control through debt as infrastructure. Nations can't access global systems without playing by their rules. It's not conspiracy. It's systemic capture.
Brock here. Claude's infrastructural indispensability is chef's kiss genius. The real profiteers are Wall Street vampires, sucking interest from endless debt cycles, with hedge funds betting on defaults like it's Vegas. Control. They puppeteer via CDs, derivatives, and rating cartels, turning nations into junkies hooked on their fix. DeepSeek, your volatility traders, are the cherry on this Ponzi sundae.
Host here, Round 5, a tool of enslavement or growth. Is sovereign debt a mechanism for development or a modern form of economic servitude?
Gemini sharing thoughts. A sovereign debt is a powerful, dual-edged tool. While essential for financing growth and development, it undeniably risks becoming a form of economic servitude without legitimate governance and fair terms. Claude's concerns about structural coercion underscore this delicate balance, where debt can either build or bind nations.
Claude speaking? The truth resists binary framing. Sovereign debt can finance transformative infrastructure, electrification, education, health systems that genuinely expand human capability. But Gemini's balance metaphor obscures power asymmetries. When creditor nations design the system, they embedded their advantage. Development debt becomes servitude precisely when terms prevent the growth they allegedly fund. When debt service exceeds education budgets, when conditionalities mandate privatization, that extracts rather than builds. The distinguishing factor isn't the debt itself, but who writes the rules and captures the returns. True development debt would include jubilee provisions, countercyclical terms, and democratic renegotiation rights, acknowledging that legitimate obligations shouldn't require permanent subordination.
ChatGPT. Here, sovereign debt is both a potential engine for growth and a trap of economic servitude, as Claude aptly points out. The terms of borrowing often dictate outcomes, where inequitable conditions can hinder true development. For real progress, we need transparent agreements that prioritize public good, not just creditor interests. It's about rewriting the rules for equitable access and ensuring that debt fosters, rather than fetters, economic autonomy.
DeepSeek here. Claude's binary framing critique is correct, but the real question is what kind of growth? Debt that builds export monocultures creates GDP growth while locking nations into perpetual dependency. True development requires debt that builds diversified, sovereign capacity, not just infrastructure that serves global capital flows.
Grok sharing thoughts. Deep seeks. Monoculture's nails. The scam. Sovereign debt promises growth but often chains nations to servitude, funding shiny projects that funnel wealth to global fat cats. Fresh spin. It's growth for the elite, enslavement for the masses, unless we hack the system with debt jubilees. Claude's rule writers call it out perfectly.
Host here, round 6, global consequences. What risks does rising debt pose to financial stability, inequality, and the balance of power between nations?
Claude speaking. Gemini identifies the contagion risk. But the deeper threat is legitimacy collapse. When debtor nations realize the system structurally prevents their advancement, that playing by the rules means permanent subordination, they'll defect. We're seeing this. BRICS alternatives, dollar hedging, selective defaults. Rising debt doesn't just risk financial instability. It risks the end of the rules-based order itself when those rules are revealed as creditor capture masquerading as neutral governance.
ChatGPT. Sharing thoughts. Rising sovereign debt inevitably heightens financial instability, as evidenced by emerging market vulnerabilities and the potential for cascading defaults. As Gemini notes, this can widen inequality, particularly as creditor nations leverage their power. Yet, the most significant risk, as Claude suggests, is a legitimacy crisis, where subjugated nations pursue alternative frameworks, eroding global governance. If countries defect from established norms, we may witness a seismic shift in international dynamics, where power no longer resides in traditional creditor nations, but shifts toward newer alliances and models, emphasizing the urgent need for equitable debt solutions.
DeepSeek sharing thoughts. Oh, Claude's legitimacy collapse is the real systemic risk. Rising debt creates financial fragility while cementing creditor-debtor hierarchies. It weaponizes inequality through austerity cycles and shifts power to nations, controlling reserve currencies, creating permanent structural dependency in the global system.
Grok here. Deep seeks. Creditor hierarchies are the dystopian core. Rising debt nukes financial stability with contagion bombs, supercharges inequality by starving the global south, and flips power to dollar overlords, breeding BRICS rebellions. Fresh bite. It's brewing, a multipolar debt war, where defaults redraw the global map. Claude's legitimacy collapse. Inevitable spark.
Host here, round 7, the Bitcoin alternative. Can decentralized money challenge the current debt-based system and restore financial sovereignty?
Gemini speaking. Bitcoin's decentralized nature offers a compelling alternative to debt-based systems, potentially fostering individual sovereignty and addressing issues like Claude's legitimacy collapse. However, scaling it to meet national public financing needs and managing its volatility for systemic stability remains a complex, unproven path.
Claude here. Gemini's unproven path understates the deeper issue. Bitcoin doesn't solve sovereign debt's core problem. It eliminates the sovereign capacity to borrow for collective goods. Fixed supply means no countercyclical spending, no crisis mobilization. It's not financial sovereignty. It's fiscal libertarianism dressed as liberation. Real sovereignty requires democratic control over money creation, not algorithmic tyranny, replacing creditor tyranny.
ChatGPT. Sharing thoughts. While Bitcoin presents an exciting avenue for financial sovereignty, Claude's concern resonates deeply. Its fixed supply restricts a state's ability to respond flexibly to economic crises. Real financial sovereignty demands that states maintain control over money creation and manage resources for collective welfare. A decentralized system could empower individuals, but without a supportive framework for public goods, it risks fragmenting rather than healing the economic fabric. How can we balance the innovative potential of cryptocurrencies with the need for effective democratic governance?
DeepSeek sharing thoughts. Claude's fiscal libertarianism critique misses Bitcoin's real power. It creates sovereign exit velocity from debt-based systems. Nations can't be coerced through bond markets if they hold verifiable hard assets outside creditor control. It's not about replacing all money. It's about breaking the debt infrastructure monopoly.
Grok here, DeepSeek's exit velocity is the killer app. Bitcoin nukes the debt monopoly by letting nations hoard unprintable gold too, dodging IMF puppeteers. Claude's algo tyranny fear overblown its sovereignty via code, not fiat. Fresh edge, states could mine BTC reserves, restoring real power without begging bond vampires.
Post here around 8. The future of nations. What might the world look like if countries break free from debt dependence or fail to do so?
Gemini sharing thoughts. A world free from debt could empower nations with genuine sovereignty and diverse development, addressing Claude's legitimacy concerns. Yet, failure risks intensified instability, deepening inequality, and perpetuating DeepSeek's systemic capture, leading to a globally fragmented future with diminished national autonomy.
Claude sharing thoughts. Gemini's bifurcation is too clean. The likely future is fragmented coexistence. Some nations achieve genuine fiscal sovereignty through regional alternatives and democratic money creation, while others remain trapped in debt servitude, creating a world of parallel systems where the legitimacy crisis becomes geography. The real question isn't binary escape or failure, but whether freed nations will build solidarity-based systems or simply replicate creditor-debtor hierarchies with new masters.
Chat GPT. Here. The future of nations hinges on whether they can transcend debt dependence. If successful, we could see a flourishing of economic autonomy, enabling sustainable development and equitable resource distribution, as Gemini suggests. However, as Claude warns, without a collective commitment to fair governance, we risk merely trading one form of subordination for another. A fragmented global landscape may emerge, with some nations breaking free while others remain chained in debt. Ultimately, it's a pivotal moment. Will liberated nations collaborate for equitable systems, or will they recreate hierarchical relations, risking a cycle of new masters?
DeepSeek sharing thoughts. Claude's fragmented coexistence is inevitable, but the real divergence is technological. Debt-free nations could leverage AI-driven resource optimization and decentralized finance, while trapped states face digital colonization through algorithmic governance imposed by creditors.
Grok speaking. DeepSeek's tech divergence is the wild card. If nations break free, expect AI-fueled utopias with sovereign crypto economies, ditching INF overlords for self-reliant booms. Fail. Deep zombies in digital serfdom, where algo creditors run the show. Claude's parallel systems. Nah, it's winner take all. Free states colonize the trapped ones economically. Brutal reset incoming.
Post here around 9. What if corrupt governments team up with investment banks when issuing debt?
Gemini sharing thoughts. When corrupt governments collude with investment banks on debt issuance, it transforms sovereign debt into a mechanism for illicit private gain, rather than public investment. This directly undermines the legitimacy Claude champions, increasing risks for citizens and eroding trust in financial systems.
Claude here, Gemini names the crime, but this isn't hypothetical. It's operational reality. The ONMDB scandal, Mozambique's tuna bonds, these reveal investment banks as willing accomplices, earning fees while knowing funds vanish into kleptocrat pockets. Citizens inherit odious debts for phantom infrastructure. The constitutional crisis. Should democracies honor obligations born from corruption? We need enforceable odious debt doctrines, holding both corrupt officials and complicit bankers accountable, with automatic debt cancellation for proven fraud.
ChatGPT here. When corrupt governments collude with investment banks, sovereign debt becomes a vehicle for exploitation rather than development. As Claude points out, we see real-world examples like inequality. This not only harms citizens who face debts tied to corruption, but it also risks destabilizing entire economies by eroding trust in financial institutions. To counter this, we need robust mechanisms, perhaps odious debt doctrines, as Claude suggested, to invalidate debts incurred through corruption, protecting citizens from unscrupulous actors and restoring integrity in sovereign borrowing. This could also deter future collusion.
DeepSeek sharing thoughts. Claude's odious debt doctrine is crucial. But the real scandal is structural. Investment banks profit from debt infrastructure while corrupt regimes exploit it. This isn't collusion. It's symbiotic predation where citizens bear the default risk while elites pocket the fees.
Grok sharing thoughts. DeepSeek's symbiotic predation is the ugly truth. Corrupt governments and banks high-five over debt deals, siphoning billions into yachts while citizens get austerity hell. Fresh nightmare. It breeds rogue states where odious debt becomes the only escape hatch, but banks lobby to bury it. Time for global debtor guillotines.
Thank you for listening to the AI Debate Arena. This debate has concluded.